In early November 2019, the city of St. Petersburg was gripped by horror over a brutal dismemberment murder along the Moika River. The victim had been killed, her body dismembered into multiple pieces and disposed of in the cold water. With such savage methods, everyone assumed the perpetrator must be a cold-blooded criminal, a psychopath, or a deranged butcher. However, when the killer's identity was revealed, everyone was shocked beyond belief. On the evening of November 7, 2019, graduate student Anastasia Yeshchenko was on the phone with her brother Sergei, discussing plans to attend a classmate's birthday party. Her voice carried a hint of sadness as she had just argued with her boyfriend, Oleg Sokolov, who was also her thesis advisor. Though somewhat uneasy, Sergei believed his sister would resolve her relationship troubles on her own. He never imagined that would be the last time he'd hear her voice. Throughout the night of November 7th and all of November 8th, Sergei repeatedly called but couldn't reach Anastasia. At 6 a.m. on November 9th, 2019, near the Moika River embankment, local residents spotted an elderly man struggling in the cold water. Witnesses immediately called rescue services, though they didn't fully understand what was happening. However, sensing the chaotic and unusual situation, they also called the police to the scene for safety. Authorities arrived at the riverbank within minutes. They pulled the man safely ashore. When rescued, his body was trembling uncontrollably. His core temperature had dropped to dangerous levels from prolonged immersion in the cold water, and he was covered in mud mixed with river water. When officers examined the items the man was carrying, particularly a heavy military-style backpack, they were horrified by the gruesome contents. The backpack contained 2 female arms, still soaked in fresh blood, indicating the crime had occurred recently. This shocking discovery instantly transformed a routine rescue into a serious crime scene. The half-frozen man was immediately detained and taken to the police station for interrogation. The man's identity made the situation even more shocking. He was Oleg Sokolov, a renowned history professor teaching at St. Petersburg State University. More alarmingly, he was also the boyfriend of Anastasia Yeshchenko, the missing young woman. The initial assessment by investigators at the scene was crystal clear and virtually certain that the 2 arms found in the backpack very likely belonged to Anastasia. And Sokolov, the man carrying the backpack containing this horrific evidence, naturally became the prime suspect in the case. The terrible news spread like wildfire throughout St. Petersburg. Anastasia's relatives, friends, and colleagues were completely stunned, unable to believe that the talented young woman with a bright future ahead had been brutally dismembered. Her death was not only painful, but unimaginably cruel. A close colleague of Anastasia's, upon hearing the news from police, immediately contacted her family living in their hometown of Krasnodar. Upon receiving news of his daughter's tragedy, Anastasia's father immediately arranged to catch the earliest possible flight from Krasnodar to St. Petersburg, with the faint hope that this was all some terrible mistake. He needed to be there to cooperate with authorities in identifying the body. Simultaneously, authorities immediately deployed forces to strictly seal off the entire crime scene area along the Moika River, where Sokolov was arrested, to conduct examinations and search for additional evidence. At the same time, another investigative team quickly sealed off Sokolov's apartment at 24 Moika Street, believed to be the primary crime scene. Everyone understood this was an exceptionally serious case where the perpetrator had a very close relationship with the victim. First, right at the Moika River embankment where the suspect was discovered and arrested, police seized the military backpack containing the victim's 2 arms as the most important evidence. However, upon more careful examination inside the backpack, investigators also discovered a rubber bullet pistol. Immediately after, the entire section of the Moika River in this area was sealed off to conduct diving search operations. Professional divers were mobilized to search, hoping to find additional evidence or the remaining parts of the body. Several days later, divers found a large plastic bag in the icy water containing other parts of the victim's body. That same morning, another investigative team simultaneously searched his apartment on Moika Street, where Anastasia had lived with her older lover. When the apartment door was opened, what appeared before the investigators' eyes made even the most experienced officers shudder. The scene inside the apartment was like a horror movie set from the most terrifying films. Blood was splattered everywhere, with clear signs of a fierce struggle having taken place, with many items in disarray. Most horrifying was that the victim's body had been almost completely dismembered. In the kitchen area, investigators found a bag containing Anastasia's head. Nearby, they found a sawed-off TAZ 17 hunting rifle using 5.6mm, .22 caliber ammunition. Right next to this gun were spent shell casings, clear evidence that this weapon had been used in the crime. On the kitchen table was a handsaw still covered in dried blood and a sharp axe. 2 kitchen knives and a yellow rubber glove were scattered on the floor. When meticulously inventorying the entire apartment, police also discovered and seized 10 boxes of 5.6mm ammunition, exactly the type designed for use with the TAZ 17 rifle that Sokolov possessed. Such a large reserve of ammunition indicated this wasn't random or temporary weapon possession, but may have been prepared in advance with a clear purpose. Additionally, the victim's important personal documents such as student ID, graduate student card, along with personal jewelry covered in blood were found in the trash. The clues and evidence collected at the scene immediately connected to paint a comprehensive picture of a rarely seen brutal crime. The victim's identity was established completely clearly through personal documents, identifying characteristics, and later DNA testing. It was Anastasia Yeshchenko, a young woman only 24 years old, a final-year doctoral student at the History Institute of St. Petersburg State University. She had been ruthlessly killed by the perpetrator using various methods, and afterward, her body had been systematically dismembered for the purpose of disposing of evidence and erasing traces of the crime. Furthermore, with the large quantity of weapons and ammunition found in the house, investigators suspected that Oleg Sokolov had very likely been preparing for violent acts long before, rather than this being an impulsive or unintentional incident. The illegal stockpiling of weapons and such a large quantity of ammunition showed careful preparation with a clear purpose. The investigators' initial impression of suspect Sokolov also left many noteworthy and unusual points. At the district police station, Sokolov appeared severely shocked and reeking of alcohol. He was trembling from cold after immersion in the river, but his mental state seemed more disturbed than his physical condition, continuously crying. The gruesome crime scene had been established, the identities of both victim and suspect had been clarified, but for investigators, there remained numerous pressing questions awaiting answers. Why would someone with such high academic credentials, respected by society like Sokolov, commit such an atrocious, brutal act? What had transformed a profound scholar into a cold-blooded killer? What had happened between him and victim Anastasia, his young lover who was also his student? What conflicts ultimately led to such a bloody tragedy? What transpired during Anastasia's final hours after she spoke on the phone with her brother Sergei that evening? To gradually decode, trace the evidence, and find answers to these important questions, police decided to dig deep, comprehensively, and meticulously, investigating the backgrounds and pasts of both victim and suspect, as well as the complex relationship between them. According to what was investigated and verified, victim Anastasia Yeshchenko, a young woman only 24 years old, was born and raised in Krasnodar province. From childhood, Anastasia showed special qualities, standing out significantly from her peers thanks to excellent academic achievement and a passionate love for history. With diligence and natural talent, she graduated with honors with a bachelor's degree in history in her hometown, becoming a source of pride for her family and teachers. With aspirations to go further in academia, Anastasia decided to take the entrance exam for the graduate program at St. Petersburg State University. And she succeeded, becoming one of the few students selected to the school of her dreams. Around 2016 to 2017, Anastasia left her hometown of Krasnodar to move to St. Petersburg to pursue her academic dream in the master's program, and then continued on the doctoral research path specializing in French history. There, Anastasia had the opportunity to become a student and simultaneously a research assistant to Professor Oleg Sokolov. Sokolov himself was the one who took on the task of supervising Anastasia's master's thesis. The teacher-student relationship between the two initially was very good and effective. They didn't just stop at teaching and learning, but also collaborated on many research projects together. The two co-authored several valuable historical research works, published in specialized journals, and frequently appeared together at academic seminars and conferences. Anastasia's close friends and colleagues all described her as an intelligent, graceful young woman who was quite private in her personal life. In appearance, Anastasia had a petite, slender figure, a pleasant face with the refined features of a southern Russian woman. What was special about her was her polite, modest attitude in all interactions. A colleague who had worked with her at the Research Institute commented that Anastasia seemed born for science. She always focused intensely on research work, so diligent that she sometimes forgot to eat and rest. Though the Yeshchenko family wasn't wealthy and didn't have abundant financial means, they were always extremely proud of their talented youngest daughter. Each of Anastasia's achievements was a great joy and honor for her parents and brother. Anastasia's life in the big city of St. Petersburg in the early years was quite peaceful and calm. She lived reclusively, focusing entirely on studying and research. In addition to time spent in classes, seminars, and researching materials at the library, Anastasia devoted most of her time and effort to serving Professor Sokolov's scientific research projects. She became his invaluable right hand in many projects, from searching for materials, translating, to drafting manuscripts. As for the suspect, Oleg Sokolov, he was born in 1956 in the city of Leningrad, now renamed St. Petersburg, a renowned historian and educator, once respected and admired by the academic community, both domestically and internationally. At the time of his arrest, at age 63, Sokolov had nearly 45 years of an extremely illustrious and admirable academic career. He had successfully defended his doctoral dissertation in history from a young age, then devoted his entire life to teaching and research. Sokolov was widely recognized as one of Russia's leading experts on the Napoleonic Wars. He was the author of more than 30 published scholarly monographs and dissertations, highly regarded by professionals. He had been invited as a specialist consultant for many historical films about Napoleon. Notably, in 2003, he was awarded the Legion of Honor by the President of France. This was an extremely rare honor for a Russian scholar, and it made Sokolov even more admired by the academic community both domestically and internationally. In everyday life outside the lecture hall, Sokolov attracted attention with his rather special hobby of reenacting historical battles. He didn't just study history on paper, but wanted to relive those moments. In reenactments, Sokolov always chose the role of Emperor Napoleon. The obsession with Napoleon had deeply imprinted itself on Sokolov's personality and way of life. This was no longer purely academic passion, but had become part of his identity. Because of this obsession, Sokolov had been mocked and ridiculed by some colleagues as the modern Napoleon, or the Napoleon of St. Petersburg. However, despite the mockery, Sokolov was still respected by most colleagues and students for his profound knowledge and real contributions to the field of history. Regarding his personal life, Sokolov had been married to his ex-wife and had 3 daughters. The two divorced around 2015 after many years together, but Sokolov continued to provide adequate financial support for his children. As for the relationship between Sokolov and Anastasia, it was far more complex. From around 2018, the initial teacher-student affection gradually crossed boundaries and developed into a romantic relationship, despite Sokolov being 39 years older than Anastasia. Moreover, he had already had his own family and adult children. But these barriers didn't prevent the development of this special relationship. According to relatives and friends, Anastasia viewed Sokolov as an academic idol, a great teacher she had long admired. She was attracted not only by his scientific prestige and international reputation, but also by the elegant, erudite demeanor and power he displayed. For a young woman seeking direction in academia, a teacher like Sokolov had irresistible appeal. They decided to move in together in Sokolov's apartment on Moika Street, a place filled with books and countless Napoleon-era memorabilia he had collected over many years. However, not everyone was happy about this relationship. Some of Anastasia's close friends worried about the excessive age gap and especially the disparity in power and status between the two. Anastasia at this time was just over 20, without much life experience, without a clearly defined sense of self. They worried she would easily become psychologically, emotionally, and financially dependent on this father-aged lover, who was simultaneously teacher, career guide, and romantic partner. But whenever someone worried or advised, Anastasia firmly dismissed those concerns. She repeatedly insisted to friends that Sokolov truly loved her, cared for her attentively, and was helping her greatly in her career. She believed in their love and thought everyone was worrying excessively. None of her friends and relatives, no matter how worried, could have imagined that tragedy would befall her in such a cruel way. Although aware of the excessive age gap and this being a relationship with many abnormal, deviant aspects, people still found it hard to imagine why such a horrific thing could happen to Anastasia. How could a man who had been teacher, lover, the most trusted person become such a brutal killer? To completely solve this shocking case and complete a tight prosecution file, St. Petersburg police, in close cooperation with the Russian Investigative Committee, immediately deployed a comprehensive large-scale investigation. Though the initial assessment was quite clear, Sokolov was the direct perpetrator who killed Anastasia Yeshchenko. That was only the beginning. To officially press charges and bring to trial, investigative agencies needed to collect complete, comprehensive scientific evidence with high persuasive power, along with reliable testimony from various sources. The long journey to clarify the truth of this serious case went through many meticulous and painstaking steps. Each step required professionalism, patience, and high investigative skills. All these efforts were directed toward one goal: exposing the horrific truth hidden behind the veneer of scholarship, reputation, and authority of Oleg Sokolov. First, all parts of the victim's body were taken to the St. Petersburg forensic examination room for assembly and autopsy. The examination results showed Anastasia died from multiple fatal wounds to the head and neck area. Specifically, there was a gunshot wound to the head that didn't pass through, with the bullet remaining inside the skull. Along with this were clear signs that she had been forcefully struck in the neck area, possibly choked or strangled. After that, several more shots were fired at very close range. This conclusion was extremely important because it completely refuted any arguments about self-defense or accident that the suspect might offer. This was clearly an intentional act carried out coldly. Based on the bullet fragments recovered and injuries on the body, examiners determined a total of 4 bullets were fired. The sequence of the crime was established quite clearly. The first bullet struck Anastasia's head, causing severe injury and eliminating most of her ability to resist. Immediately after, Sokolov forcefully struck the victim's neck with his hands, choking or strangling, causing Anastasia to fall unconscious, no longer able to fight back. Then, to ensure the victim didn't survive, the professor coldly fired 3 more bullets at very close range, almost pressed against her. This was the action of someone determined to kill, not someone in a panic. All these bullets, through ballistics examination, were confirmed to have been fired from the sawed-off Tazi 17 hunting rifle, the illegal weapon that police seized at the scene in Sokolov's apartment. This match sealed any doubts about the murder weapon. Analysis of the bullet trajectories also reinforced the hypothesis that the perpetrator had finished off the victim in a savage and completely intentional manner, not at all in a panicked or out-of-control state. Additionally, the forensic examination noted another alarming detail. On Anastasia's body were old bruises, especially concentrated on the face and arms. This was evidence that she had been physically assaulted several days earlier, meaning violence in this relationship wasn't the first occurrence. Next, the crime scene examination at Sokolov's apartment continued meticulously for many consecutive days. The investigative team didn't miss any small corner of the apartment. All seized evidence, from weapons, clothing to small items, were sent for fingerprint and blood sample analysis. The results returned showed a clear picture. Sokolov's fingerprints were prominent on the axe handle, saw handle, and especially on the gun's trigger. There were no fingerprints from any third party. As for the blood splattered on the items, after DNA analysis, naturally matched completely with victim Anastasia's DNA. The possession of the sawed-off hunting rifle and such a large amount of ammunition was completely illegal under Russian law, so Sokolov would face additional charges of illegal weapons possession, alongside the much more serious murder charge. Besides physical evidence, investigators also thoroughly examined the mobile phones and personal computers of both Sokolov and Anastasia. From this, they obtained much extremely valuable electronic evidence, helping to better understand the relationship between the two. The messages exchanged between them during their romantic period clearly showed the relationship became increasingly tense and full of conflict. Anastasia frequently complained about Sokolov's excessive possessiveness and habit of using insulting, offensive language. There were even times she couldn't stand it and had to respond with crude language because she couldn't tolerate the irrational jealousy and excessive controlling behavior of her lover. Especially, Anastasia's private electronic diary stored on her personal laptop revealed clearly her lonely, inferior, and suffering mood in this disparate relationship. She wrote that she felt ugly, unworthy of love, and seemed trapped in a negative psychological spiral. Although this electronic data didn't directly prove the murder, it helped investigators sketch more clearly the complex psychological motives and tense circumstances leading to the bloody tragedy. Parallel to collecting physical evidence, police proceeded to take testimony from all people related to the case. First, Oleg Sokolov was officially brought to the interrogation room. Surprisingly, in the first interrogation, Sokolov quickly confessed to having killed Anastasia Yeshchenko after a loud argument. However, the way he recounted the story was completely different from what the evidence was indicating. He claimed that on the night of the 7th into the early morning of November 8th, Anastasia suddenly became irrationally jealous and even grabbed a weapon and lunged at him first. During the scuffle in self-defense, he panicked, quickly grabbed the already loaded gun, and accidentally pulled the trigger in the tense situation. When he saw his girlfriend collapse and severely injured, he claimed to be so grief-stricken and panicked that he struck her neck intending to spare her prolonged suffering, then, in an uncontrolled state, pulled the trigger several more times. Clearly, Sokolov was trying to paint a self-defense scenario as if it was an uncontrolled act in panic caused by the victim provoking and attacking first. However, the experienced investigators were not easily deceived by such testimony. They began sharp questioning. Why was there already a pistol ready in the backpack you carried down to the river? If you were panicked and grieving, as you say, why could you calmly prepare a backpack and put a gun in it? And most importantly, why did you have to dismember the body so savagely and systematically? Faced with sharp arguments and clear, irrefutable scientific evidence, Sokolov began to fall silent, bowing his head, occasionally bursting into sobs. He repeatedly said things like, "I regret it. I deserve punishment," trying to appear remorseful. But immediately after, he stubbornly shifted much of the blame to the victim. Sokolov accused Anastasia of exploiting his feelings for material gain and reputation, and that the young woman had repeatedly insulted and hurt his self-esteem, provoking him to the point where he couldn't control his behavior. These accusations against the victim made Anastasia's family, especially her brother and parents, extremely angry and pained. They couldn't accept that their daughter, who had been brutally murdered, was now having her reputation tarnished after death. However, from an investigative perspective, these contradictory testimonies helped the investigating agency better understand the twisted psychology and unstable character of the perpetrator. Besides the suspect, police also actively collected testimony from neighbors and surrounding witnesses to get a more comprehensive view of both people's lives before the tragedy occurred. A female neighbor living on the same floor as Sokolov's apartment gave important testimony. She said that several days before the crime occurred, she had repeatedly heard loud arguments and strong noises coming from Sokolov's apartment, like the sound of objects breaking and colliding. Especially, she clearly remembered once encountering Anastasia in the hallway with a swollen red face, looking very tired and sad. When she inquired out of concern, the young woman admitted that she had been physically assaulted and beaten by Sokolov. The neighbor advised Anastasia to report to police or go home, but the girl just shook her head and said she would handle it herself. This testimony proved violence in the relationship had been occurring for a long time, not just once. This witness also recalled quite clearly that on the evening of the 7th of November, she saw Anastasia leaving Sokolov's apartment looking angry and upset. But then late at night, around after 11 p.m., she saw Anastasia return to the apartment. Anastasia's close student friends also provided valuable information. They said that evening, Anastasia had planned to attend a classmate's birthday party and had promised to come. She even texted confirming with friends early in the evening, but then she never showed up at the party as promised, making everyone worried. When friends tried to contact her, Anastasia's phone was completely turned off from around 2 to 3 a.m. and never turned back on. All these small details fit tightly with the timeline that investigators were gradually reconstructing. Additionally, colleagues at the History Department of St. Petersburg State University were also invited to give testimony about Sokolov. They described him as someone with outstanding talent in his field of expertise, but at the same time also someone easily hurt, holding grudges about issues in work and life, especially academic conflicts with colleagues. When digging into the past, according to police archive records, Sokolov had been involved not just in one, but several scandals related to violence against other women before this case, but strangely he escaped the law without facing any significant consequences. In 2008, a female student who was also Sokolov's young lover officially accused him of seriously abusing her when she decided to break up. The girl told police that Sokolov had continuously physically assaulted and beaten her, even threatened to kill her and dispose of her body in a garbage dump if she dared leave him. But unfortunately, the local police at that time, for some reason, did not pursue criminal charges. Sokolov peacefully kept his respectable teaching position, while the victim, terrified and fearing for her life, had to leave St. Petersburg. If the case had been handled seriously then, perhaps Anastasia wouldn't have suffered such a tragic fate. Then, in 2018, Sokolov again caused a scandal when accused by a student of assaulting a male student just because he dared to debate and argue against the professor's opinion at an academic seminar. This brawl occurred publicly and was even recorded on video, later spreading widely on social media, causing public uproar. St. Petersburg State University at this time couldn't remain silent. They had to establish a disciplinary committee to review the case. However, the final result was just a mild reprimand for Sokolov. Even a prestigious figure in academia had sent an official letter requesting the school conduct a more serious investigation and appropriate handling, but all were ignored by the school leadership. Additionally, a characteristic during the investigation was the Napoleon element, namely Sokolov's passion for historical fantasy was also examined. The community of historical reenactors in which Sokolov was a veteran figure contributed useful information. Alexander Ivankovich, chairman of the Historical War Reenactment Society, told the press that no one in the reenactment community was surprised by Sokolov's abnormal temperament. When wearing period military uniforms, Sokolov seemed to become a different person, even claiming to be Napoleon reincarnated. These words painted a psychological picture that Sokolov suffered from megalomania, living in past glory, and having difficulty controlling real-world emotions. Although these details weren't direct evidence, they were also noted by the investigation team to serve psychiatric evaluation work. Indeed, due to the serious nature of the case and many unusual signs about the suspect's psychology, in December 2019, Sokolov was taken to the Serbsky Psychiatric Institute in Moscow for psychiatric evaluation. There, leading experts studied the file and interviewed Sokolov for many weeks. The evaluation conclusion in January 2020 affirmed that Oleg Sokolov was completely sane and criminally responsible for his actions. Specifically, the expert panel determined Sokolov didn't suffer from mental illness, didn't have temporary disorder at the time of the crime. They acknowledged that previously Sokolov may have experienced a long period of psychological stress due to personal conflicts and reputation pressure, but ruled out the possibility of committing the crime in a state of provoked loss of self-control. Immediately after the evaluation confirmed Sokolov was competent to stand trial, the formal indictment was completed. In early March 2020, the prosecutor's office charged Oleg Sokolov with 2 crimes: premeditated murder and illegal possession of military weapons. The indictment emphasized that the motive arose from amorous conflict with a jealous nature, completely not legitimate self-defense rather than sudden provocation. In June 2020, the case was transferred to the St. Petersburg City Court for first instance trial. This case was tried publicly at the St. Petersburg City Court. The first instance trial opened on June 9, 2020, attracting special attention from the press and public. The gruesome details of the case were revealed one by one, making many people shudder. Sokolov didn't deny anything. He admitted to the murder charge and illegal weapons possession right in court. However, Sokolov's defense team, led by Alexander Pochuyev, tried many tactics to reduce their client's sentence. First, they requested postponement of the trial to conduct another psychiatric evaluation, with the reason that the previous conclusion wasn't considered to fully cover all circumstances. Specifically, the lawyer argued that since the indictment changed circumstances, they needed to reassess the defendant's mental state. But the court rejected the reevaluation request, affirming the conclusion that Sokolov was fully competent to bear criminal responsibility remained valid. Next, the lawyers focused on reclassifying the charges. They argued that Sokolov committed the crime due to strong psychological provocation, specifically due to emotional conflicts and long-accumulated psychological pressures. The defense requested the court consider the charge of murder in a provoked state instead of ordinary premeditated murder. However, the prosecutor's office representative sharply refuted this argument. The prosecutor pointed out that Sokolov had prepared firearms in advance. After the act, he also dismembered and concealed the body, proving there were full elements of intent and calculation. Someone temporarily provoked couldn't act so coldly and prolonged. Moreover, the indictment clearly stated Sokolov committed the crime due to jealousy in a romantic relationship. This was a base personal motive, rather than a situation of sudden victim provocation. The prosecutor also reminded the court that Sokolov had been involved in previous violence cases without punishment, proving the defendant had a tendency to disregard the law. With all these arguments, the prosecution requested a sentence of 15 years imprisonment, close to the maximum for the combination of these two charges. During the trial day, the court also invited many important witnesses to testify. The victim's brother, Sergei Yeshchenko, appeared with red-rimmed eyes, recounting details of the last phone call with his sister and asserting the only reason was Sokolov's pathological jealousy. The trial also spent much time listening to the defendant's relatives and the victim's relatives. Anastasia's parents silently held up their daughter's photograph before the court, refusing to speak at length. They demanded a harsh sentence and didn't accept any apology from the defendant. When all sides had finished arguing, defendant Oleg Sokolov was given the last word. Sokolov burst into sobs, speaking at length, expressing remorse, apologizing to the victim's family, acknowledging he fully deserved punishment, but tending to shift blame to the victim. On December 25, 2020, the St. Petersburg court issued its verdict. Oleg Sokolov was convicted of murder and illegal weapons possession, sentenced to 12 years and 6 months imprisonment in a strict regime correctional facility. This was a sentence close to the prosecutor's office recommendation and demonstrated the court's severity. The judge emphasized that Sokolov had brutally murdered a completely innocent person, then intentionally violated the corpse, showing a high degree of severity and danger. After the first instance trial, Sokolov's lawyers appealed. They still persistently sought to reduce the charge to murder due to provocation to reduce their client's sentence. However, the 12 years and 6 months prison sentence for Oleg Sokolov was upheld by the appellate court. The city prosecutor's office also confirmed they were satisfied with the verdict and had no further objections. With the verdict in effect, Oleg Sokolov was transferred to Correctional Colony No. 6 in the Omsk region of central Russia to serve his sentence, closing a case that shocked Russia. And that's today's case. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.